Cold November day in Germany.
I'm in northwest Germany, near the border with the Netherlands, in a town called Emmerich am Rhein. So called because it sits along the very wide Rhine River. Barges are puttering up and down, carrying metal, industrial materials, because we are in the industrial heartland of Germany. And I'm here to visit Probat, my partner sponsor for the episode, who are one of the most advanced coffee roasting manufacturers in the world. And also one of the oldest.
We've just walked into the lobby.
They're such an old company. They have their own museum.
Hi, Tina.
And in the lobby, I meet Tina,
So I do tours.
Probat's resident tour guide, because she has a special connection to the company.
And I introduce myself by showing the boards.
And the first thing Tina shows me are 3 wooden boards full of names.
I see a lot of very old wooden boards with a lot of names engraved on them. A lot of names. I mean, how many boards do we have here? 3 boards?
Yes, there's 3 boards, and they actually record those people who've been working here for more than 25 years.
25 years.
Probat celebrates every employee who has worked more than 25 years at the company on these big wooden boards. There are names here going back to the 1800s. And of these hundreds and hundreds of names, a lot of them have gold lettering.
So if it's more than 50 years.
So people with golden letters have been here for 50 years.
Yes. And how many do you see? It's like almost like a third on each wall.
Wow, 50 years at Probat.
50 years, guys. 50 years. I mean, I've been making filter stories for 8 years, and this is the longest job I've ever had. 50 years. And the very first name on this board,
Theodor von Gimborn worked at Probat for over 25 years.
a person who began working for Probat in the 1800s, is one of the company's founders.
He was a mechanical engineer.
He has his own Wikipedia page where you can marvel at his huge white beard. Link in the show notes. And he's one of Tina's ancestors.
It's my great-grandfather.
Peeps, if this ain't coffee royalty, I don't know what is. Tina then walks me past the wooden boards and into the museum to show me a very old coffee roaster. A coffee roaster built by her great-granddad, Theodor von Gimborn, just a couple of years after the American Civil War. We're talking the 1860s.
So here we are walking to, this is like a fire hydrant.
So this antique roaster, a priceless piece of coffee history, it looks to me like a fire hydrant, but
This is, you're very excited about
Well, it's because it's pink.
it's been painted pink.
I decided to do something different. Normally, they're just like metal gray.
Oh, you painted it pink?
We painted it pink.
But it wasn't originally pink.
No, it was not originally. We were in the mood to do something fancy.
Would Tina's great-granddad Theodor von Gimborn approve? I have a link in the show notes and you can decide for yourself. So anyway, Tina shows me how this fire hydrant roaster works. Guys, a roaster that might have roasted coffee for your great-grandparents, your ancestors.
You know, when you open the lid, do the sound. Don't do it by hand when it's hot.
And inside this pink fire hydrant is a small metal ball.
Fill in the coffee. So you close the lid.
So you put green coffee beans into the metal ball, put the metal ball inside this fire hydrant.
Snap it.
Gently.
This is over 150 years old, sort of.
And then you light a fire in the base.
You have to use hardwood. It burns for longer.
Then you just spin a handle to turn this metal ball around over the flames. All right, now look. No disrespect to Mr. von Gimborn, but as coffee roasters go, it was terrible. Really. Because aside from the fact that it was really hard to control the amount of heat and the fact you could burn yourself,
It's very hot. There's a lot of steam.
it roasted hardly any coffee at all,
This is for 3 kilos.
incredibly slowly.
And then you turn for about 30 minutes.
So there you are, stood there, rotating a handle over and over for 30 minutes
Yes.
for 3 kilos of coffee.
Yes.
Peeps, if you're a coffee roaster, you don't know how good you have it these days. And these little ball roasters were sold to
General stores.
little mum and pop shops.
What you had in the 19th century, where you would go in your village, in your little town.
Can you imagine the owner of a grocery store just turning a handle for half an hour at a time to roast just 3 kilos of coffee. And so obviously, Tina's great-granddad, Theodor von Gimborn, he very quickly got a piece of customer feedback.
The market asked for more. They wanted to roast more at a time.
But how do you roast more coffee faster? This is what this episode is about. We're going to see the ways Probert figured out to get more heat into beans quicker. And we've come a long way since Theodor von Gimborn's first roaster. We can now roast coffee so fast on such a scale. Imagine someone in that little general store in a small town in the 1860s turning a handle. Today we can roast enough coffee to flood that general store with coffee beans like a swimming pool. That is more coffee than you will ever drink in your lifetime. And thank goodness too that we can roast so much, because could you imagine giving the world today 8 billion people cups of coffee that had all been roasted by turning a handle for 30 minutes? And what we're going to see is that, today we have the technology to roast coffee incredibly fast. Faster than the time it takes you to make an instant coffee. But should we be roasting our coffees that fast? Well, depends who you ask. I'm James Harper, and you're listening to Filter Stories, the untold stories hidden in your cup of coffee. And this is my third series on the science of coffee, a journey into coffee's hidden microscopic secrets. So Tina's great-granddad, Theodor, he helps design this very early roaster, a bowl roaster where you put green beans inside a bowl, put it inside a fire hydrant, put fire in the base, spin the bowl around for 30 minutes to get just 3 kilos of roasted coffee. What a tease. And very soon, he got the feedback.
The market asked for more. They wanted to roast more at a time. So let's go downstairs to the bigger one.
And so roasters got bigger.
This is amazing. Look at this.
That little bowl in the fire hydrant that was maybe the size of a small melon blew up to the size of a satellite.
It's a massive cylindrical silver ball, like Sputnik, but if you broke the legs off it.
It's a Sputnik, exactly.
I've got a link in the show notes. Could you describe it any better? Anyway, with this giant metal ball inside what is basically a big pizza oven, we went from roasting just 3 kilos to
Maximum of 100. That would be the largest one.
100 kilos. Pretty impressive for the 1880s. But it still took 30 minutes. And Probert got the same feedback again.
And that was in the 1880s that the market demanded for more.
We want more coffee, faster. And then Probert finally made a roaster I started recognizing.
It's a G45.
This looks like a modern day roaster. You put this in a modern day specialty coffee shop and it'd look the part.
Yes.
Guys, this is the classic drum roaster. Go to a specialty coffee cafe, roastery, you'll see one in the corner. If you follow the link in the show notes, you'll see that it's a big cylinder like you find on an antique steam-powered train that dumps beans from its mouth into a big cooling tray in front of it. And it cut roasting times in half.
So we're talking about 30 minutes in the ball roaster, and this is 12 to 18 minutes in the drum roaster.
So how does it work? What is this cylindrical drum roaster doing differently from that fire hydrant bowl roaster that roasts coffee so much faster? Well, to answer that, we first need to understand how beans take on heat in the first place. And I will admit, for the longest time, I really had no idea. I just thought you just dump the green beans into a hot spinning oven, the beans just take on the heat and they get roasted. Things just get hot because there's heat. I didn't think there was anything more to it. But there actually is. Beans take on heat in very specific ways, different mechanisms. And once I'd learned this for this episode, I began seeing these mechanisms in every aspect of my life. When I would make banana bread in the oven, when I get burnt on a sunny day, when my girlfriend dries her hair. And there are 3 ways in which beans can take on heat. And regardless of what kind of roaster you use, beans always take on heat through these 3 different ways at the same time. But sometimes coffee roasting engineers, the scientists, disagree amongst themselves as to which one is the most important. So, let's go and start with conductive. So, like in the last episode, imagine you're a green bean and you're thrown into a hot spinning oven. You could be in that little metal ball inside the pink fire hydrant or in that big drum roaster like that old steam train looking thing. In both cases, you are going to be picking up heat by literally touching the hot metal. Conductive heat transfer. And to understand conductive heat transfer better, I spoke with a coffee roasting engineer.
I'm Mark Alshemery. No, Dr. Mark Alshemery, technically now. I'm a technology specialist at JD Peets in the Netherlands, working in R&D.
Quick aside, Mark and I had to reschedule... Sorry. Dr. Mark and I had to reschedule our conversation a number of times.
This week has been quite stressful.
And I was getting kind of frustrated by it. But turns out that was because he was traveling to Nice, France for a week to propose to his girlfriend.
And she didn't know until we got to the gate at the airport where we were going, and I had no idea this whole week that my plan was to propose to her.
No way. Have you or have you not proposed to her?
I did.
And she said?
She said, "Oh my God, I'm so shocked. I didn't expect this." Yes, obviously, yes.
Oh, come off it. You knew all along you were going to get proposed to. So all this to say, I'm very thankful to Mark for taking a little bit of time out from his romantic weekend to talk to me about the other big love of his life, coffee roasting conduction. Right, so beans in a roaster. How do they take on heat through conduction? Well, to explain that, first I got to show you what beans are doing in the roaster, like how they're actually moving around. And for the longest time in the coffee industry, we could see that beans were bouncing around inside a roaster, but we didn't know the exact path beans were taking, which is really important because we didn't know how many times a bean was touching the hot metal to heat up. And so Mark tried to figure this out in a really wacky way.
Positron emission, particle tracking.
He literally made a single coffee bean radioactive.
We took a little coffee bean, labeled it with irradiated water, put the coffee bean in a batch of beans inside a roaster, and then a roaster inside a PET scanner.
So picture this. A little coffee roaster sat inside a machine that kind of looks like those big scanners they have in the hospitals where you kind of lie down, they push you through a hole and scan your head. Like a little coffee roaster inside a massive machine like that.
And then based on the gamma rays that are given off and emitted, you can detect where the particles are.
And so the scanner tracked the path of the radioactive bean inside a drum roaster.
So you can track the coffee bean in real time, showing where it goes.
And I really hope Mark didn't throw away the beans afterwards, because I think radioactive beans would perk you up so much more than caffeine.
This is Greg from the International Bureau of Beverage Safety and Radiological Compliance. You cannot say that. Nuclear energy, coffee, radiation, big public health no-no.
All right, Greg. Yeah, sure, whatever. Anyway, after Mark did lots and lots of tests, he discovered that the path coffee beans take inside a drum roaster, it's exactly the same as your laundry.
Particle motion in drum roasters is the same as a washing machine or a clothes dryer.
All right, guys, so I have a great idea for your Saturday mornings. I want you to pull up a chair and look at your washing machine as it spins clothes around. And pull up some chairs for your kids too. They're going to love it. And what you're going to notice is a lot of the clothes sit in this big fat pile at the bottom. But every now and then, a single piece of clothing will come out, hit the drum wall, and then go back into the churning pile at the bottom. Coffee beans do the same thing. They're in this big fat pile at the bottom, all touching each other, and then occasionally a bean will fly out, travel through the air, hit the drum wall, and then bounce back into that spinning pile of beans. And so, Mark hypothesizes that if we were to zoom into just one coffee bean and look at how it takes on heat, it's not like some very orderly going up gracefully. Okay, now we're at 100 degrees, now we're at 101 degrees, now we're at 102 degrees. No. Mark theorizes it's more like, cool, we're chilling. Oh my God, it's really hot. Oh my God. Oh, it's colder. Just chilling. Oh my God, it's really hot. Oh, okay, it's colder.
So if you actually think about the way beans heat in these kind of roasters, that you get a spike in temperature and then it goes down. And then it gets spiked when it gets near the wall and then it goes down. And then up again and then cooling. So it's this kind of like oscillations in temperature.
And so, according to this theory, if you spin the drum really, really fast, like when your washing machine is in the drying cycle, you'll notice that a lot of the clothes stick to the edge of the drum. And Mark's theoretical model suggests the faster you spin the barrel of a drum roaster, the faster beans take on heat, because they spend a lot more time in contact with hot metal. And his research gets much, much more nerdy, looking at how like the size of beans, the density of the beans, how fast the drum is rotating, how that all affects how coffee moves in a drum roaster. And if you're a coffee roaster, he has some recommendations for you.
So rather than always putting, say, 4 kilos in a 5 kilo roaster, try and have a fixed volume. And then in that way, you account for things like density, etc.
Link in the show notes if you want to go down that rabbit hole. So that's the first way all coffee beans take on heat. Conduction. They literally touch hot metal. But I must say, during my conversations, I sensed there was a professional disagreement around whether conduction really matters at all that much in getting beans hotter. And that's what we shall explore coming up next. What some engineers think is a superior way of getting heat into a bean. Wow. This is an enormous space. Like 2-3 tennis courts big?
Yeah.
This is pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And a lot of just pipes and machinery and wires everywhere. So I'm back at Probat and walking into their R&D center.
So where we have all kind of equipment in link to coffee roasting.
And in this space full of tubes and wires and roasters, I meet one of Probat's engineers.
My name's Sebastian Tück. I'm a research engineer and PhD candidate. And I'm working on modeling the roasting process and the machinery.
Sebastian looks the same age as me, but he's been here a long time. And how long have you worked at Probat?
15 years.
Really? Wow. 15 years.
So I've seen nothing but coffee since my working life.
Lucky you. Only 10 more years before you get on that wooden board, Sebastian. I believe in you. Coffee for life. All right, so a few minutes ago, we saw how conduction is one way in which heat can get into coffee beans. But Sebastian here disagrees that beans hitting hot metal, conductive heat transfer, actually matters that much at all when it comes to coffee roasting in, for example, that pink fire hydrant bowl roaster or that big steam train looking drum roaster. And he explained why he doesn't think conduction really matters that much by using an analogy.
So if you think about putting a sphere on a plate.
Like, imagine an orange sitting on a plate. How much of that orange is actually in contact with the plate?
Tiny, tiny, tiny area.
So Sebastian's argument is when a bean is flying around in a roaster and it hits the hot walls, only a tiny little bit of the bean at any one time is actually in contact with the hot metal. And so Sebastian's argument is
there's virtually going to be no heat flow there.
There's just not enough contact area for that bean to really take on a lot of heat. And so we're now moving on to the second way that heat gets into coffee beans. Radiative heat transfer. And in Probat's R&D center, surrounded by roasters and tubes and wires, Sebastian explained to me radiative heat transfer. And just to be clear, we're not talking here about nuclear radiation.
We're not putting nuclear energy into roasters.
Although, wouldn't that be kind of fun?
this is Greg again from the International Bureau of Beverage Safety and Radiological Compliance. If you make another joke, this podcast will have to be terminated.
All right, Greg, no more nuclear jokes.
Basically, what is temperature? Temperature is vibration of atoms. So if you have electromagnetic wave, they can bring those molecules to swing faster, which increases the temperature. That's what radiation is.
So radiative heat transfer is when electromagnetic waves are flying off the hot metal, traveling through the air and hitting the coffee beans as they're flying around in a roaster.
Electromagnetic waves are then going to be absorbed by the coffee beans, in turn heating.
And this is why you get sunburnt from the sun. Not by touching it, conductive heat transfer, but by being bombarded by its rays, radiative heat transfer. But how effective is radiative heat transfer at getting heat into beans? Well, according to Sebastian, much more than conductive, because so much more of the bean is exposed to these heat energy rays.
There's a lot of area which is visible to the wall, which is visible to radiation.
Right? Like imagine a bean in the roaster. It's sat in that churning pile in the bottom. But when it flies out of that clump and it's in the air by itself, half the bean is going to be in the direct line of sight of the hot metal, which means half of the bean is being bombarded by these hot energy rays. That's a lot of heat transfer. So to recap, we've just covered two ways in which you can get heat into a bean.
Conduction,
beans touching the hot metal.
Radiation.
Beans being in the line of fire of electromagnetic heat waves. But, guys, it's still nothing compared to the third way we can get heat into a bean. I have saved the best for last. A way of roasting coffee so efficiently. You can roast a batch of coffee not in half an hour, not in 15 minutes, not in 7 minutes. Faster than it takes you to boil a kettle.
Convection.
Air. Technically known as convection. Now, roaster manufacturers had figured out that wind was helping speed up roasting way back when, in the late 19th century.
We have it right behind the ball roaster. It stands on a little table. It's a tiny, cute little roaster.
Back in the Probert Museum with Tina, she shows me this adorable little drum roaster, like a toy train.
It has an exhaust, which means there's air being blown through the roasting drum, making winds.
Peeps, so I think this is the reason why that steam train looking drum roaster can roast coffee in half the time compared to the pink fire hydrant bowl roaster. Because this exhaust, which was probably added to get rid of the smoke that built up during roasting and could taint the flavor of the coffee, by putting in this exhaust, you're putting in air. And just like the fan-assisted oven in your kitchen, you could cook your food at 200 degrees Celsius, or you only need to cook it at 180 if you turn the fan on. Convection heat transfer.
Yes.
And when I was speaking with Sebastian Tuck, he said, even today, in Probert's drum roasters, air is the thing that's actually heating the beans the most. So you're saying in a drum roaster, most of the energy transfer is through...
Convection.
Convection.
It's always convection.
Convection.
Yes.
Probert's drum roasters have these powerful fans that suck hot air through the roasting drum. And it's this hot air that does most of the roasting while the beans are just getting, thrown around inside with paddles. So all that stuff I told you about conduction, radiation, for sure, those things are taking place to some degree. But if you want to roast fast and also have really fine control of how much heat you're giving to the beans, you got to use air. And over the years, Probert pushed air to the limit. They built these roasters that can roast coffee mind-bogglingly fast. And again, this is not new technology. In fact, back in the Probert Museum, Tina showed me this historical roaster that's one of the fastest roasters ever engineered.
And so when you open this lid, there's this long metal handle here. There's another little
Sorry about that. That's such a screech.
And then you have this double drum inside.
This is an early tangential roaster built around 80 years ago.
There's also air in here, but the heat comes from the back, only from...
And peeps, I have a treat for you. Tangential roasters are still in use today, very much so. And the Probert team, they showed me a small version of it. This is a sample tangential roaster. which you would use to figure out the roast profile for then, an industrial massive one. Especially coffee roasters. Get this. Minimum roast quantity for a tangential sample roaster, 2 kilos. I gotta say, I've never seen a roaster like this. Because this is not your typical roaster you would see in a specialty coffee roastery.
No,
It's a cube.
Yeah, now you see nothing. It's like a shoebox.
It's a shoebox. The Probet team wanted to show me how fast you can roast coffee using air. The beans are in. So we're now going to look at an entire roast from start to finish. All right, load up the beans. Don't worry, it'll be over before you know it. The extremely knowledgeable Ilvana Weiler, a trainer and consultant at the Probet Training Center, is leading the roast. She pours green beans into the top of this shoebox-shaped tangential roaster, and then hot air blasts up from underneath.
You bring in the heat from the burner, bring it through the beans, and then out of the roaster.
And also inside this tangential roaster is...
So we have a pedal mixer inside.
kind of like a Ferris wheel, which scoops up beans and then chucks them into the path of the hot oncoming air.
We are at 40 seconds and have reached now the turning point, around about 160 degrees.
And guys, in just 40 seconds, these green beans went from room temperature to 160 degrees Celsius.
185 degrees at 85 seconds.
Just a minute and a half into this roast, we're flying through first crack. And if you're not sure what first crack is and why it's so important, listen to my episode Coffee Roasting Part 1, How Heat Transforms Beans. Link in the show notes.
115 seconds, 205.
And the other crazy thing is how loud these beans are cracking.
It's very intense because the volume expansion of the beans is very strong because of the water vaporization, and that's why you hear the crack very loud.
And before we've even reached 2.5 minutes, the beans are at 218 degrees Celsius, and the roast, it's done. We've already reached a medium roast.
To 19, 20, stopping the roasting process automatically.
It's unbelievable. I've never seen coffee like loaded up, and then 2 minutes later, no, a minute and a half later, you're hearing like cracks. That's unbelievably fast.
Yes, it is. So that's the aim of industrial roasting, not to lose time, not to lose energy. Just close the roaster, empty it, and you load the next batch.
And so now it's time to know, what is it about air that roasts coffee so fast? Coming up next, I show you why. So far in this episode, we've seen an extraordinary transformation. Probet's first roaster, engineered by Tina's great-granddad, Theodore, that metal ball in a fire hydrant, that took 30 minutes to roast coffee. And then came along drum roasters that looked like old steam-powered trains, and that cut roasting times in half, from 30 minutes to 15 minutes. But what we just saw here with a tangential roaster, a 2.5-minute roast, or even 2 minutes if you really pushed it, very few, if any, drum roasters could ever roast this fast. So how is it possible? What is air doing that makes these beans cook so quickly? And help me understand it. So are we going to get geeky?
As geeky as you like.
Sebastian pulls up his laptop to show me a computer model.
This is a model that has been growing over the past 8 years.
The simulation of the roasting process.
A digital twin of our roaster.
Guys, I'm telling you, this thing is unbelievably complex. Oh my God.
That is the tree of submodels.
Get out. That's like 25 in here.
Yes.
They've modeled almost every single way that coffee beans heat up in a roaster. Each model layered and layered full of very complex mathematics and theoretical assumptions.
For the fellow nerds out there, this is calculated in MATLAB Simulink.
And one of their particularly complicated models,
which horrible. It's just a horrible mess.
Is about convection, how beans take on heat because of the air. And a quick aside, for this model to work, what the Probet team needed were like some estimates for how big green beans are. Like, how are they shaped on average? And you can imagine this is really important information because if you're trying to model how a bean moves through the air, well, you kind of need to know how big the bean is, right? What's its shape? And to get all this data, they literally had to measure thousands of beans one by one.
We measured a total of 5,000 beans with a caliper,
With a caliper.
which took a week.
We just sat there in a room with this,
Yes.
with this like basically a measuring device, just measuring.
We sat there, Spotify on, and measured for 8 hours straight bean lengths, widths, and heights,
Really?
just to get a distribution of what should we be expecting in coffee beans.
And so after this week where they'd basically heard every song on Spotify, they were able to model how beans move through the air and take on heat. And would you believe it? Coffee beans move through the air like little comets. That's so cool. It's like little coffee beans as meteorites flying through the atmosphere with like
Exactly.
burning tails.
Kind of, yeah.
And the model shows why air is so effective at heating beans up. The key is that when the bean is going through hot air, that bean is surrounded by heat. The hot air. It's having a bath in warm air.
Convectional heat transfer covers the whole bean.
So heat is being applied to all the bean at once. And as Ilvana explained to me, the water inside the green bean carries that heat throughout the green bean, cooking it deep inside very quickly.
With the moisture inside the bean, you transfer the heat into the center of the bean.
And when Ilvana picks out a bean that had been roasted in that tangential roaster in just like 2.5 minutes and cracks it open, this is the scientific method known as using your nails, I'm really surprised at how evenly it's cooked throughout.
Goes a little bit lighter in the inside, but it's not that extreme. For a 2 minutes roast to this color, I think it's quite a good roast.
So let's just zoom out and contrast why convectional heat transfer works so much better at heating beans compared to conduction and heat radiation. Right, so using air, the beans are in this hot bath of air. And so the entire surface of the bean is getting cooked at once. Now contrast that with conductive heat transfer, where the bean literally touches hot metal. According to Sebastian, with that orange on the plate analogy, only a little bit of the bean is actually in touch with the hot metal. So only a tiny bit of the bean is getting heated up at any one time. So not great at getting a lot of heat into the bean. And then the other way, radiative heat transfer, where heat rays are flying off the metal and traveling through the air. Well, the thing is, as a bean is flying through a roaster, only like one side of it is exposed to heat radiation at any one time. Just like when I was in El Salvador a few years back making a Filter Stories series, and I went surfing, and most of the day I was just lying on my stomach on my board. My stomach was completely fine, but my poor back was burned for days. And that's what makes air so great. It cooks all the bean at once. And the other really cool thing about convection is that you can speed up how much heat gets into the beans by changing how fast the air moves. And Sebastian had another great analogy, this time with a hairdryer.
Normally, if you have a hairdryer, there's going to be 2 dials on it. One is going to be make it hotter, and you can have it at a low fan speed, or you can have it at a higher fan speed. Right. If you put it on the high setting and hold it against your hand, you can probably hold it for, let's say, 5 seconds. If you put the fan up to maximum, you can only hold it for maybe 2 or 3 seconds at most, because the heat transfer is so much more.
Got it. I've never actually done that. I don't actually own a hairdryer, a hairblower. So.
Me neither, because I don't have hair.
But I'll speak to my girlfriend about it, see if she concurs. And so what this means is that the speed of the hot air is the secret to roasting coffee super fast and very energy efficiently. So I'm back in Purbett's R&D Center, and we've just spent half an hour roasting up coffees on this sample tangential roaster. And in just half an hour, we are penned in, surrounded by buckets and buckets and buckets of roasted coffee. Yeah, I mean, so we've been here for what, 30 minutes? How much coffee have we already roasted on a sample roaster in 30 minutes?
It's 16 kilo green bean, so... Yeah.
Sample roasting. You can imagine, for some people, that's like what they were going to roast an entire morning, in a specialty cafe. That's next level. Wow. What a micro roaster can roast in an entire morning, we get in just 30 minutes. And This gets me wondering. Like, in the specialty coffee world, why don't we roast coffee this fast? Like, the way it works right now is, a lot of roasters use drum roasters and have roast times that are between, 10 to 20 minutes? Peeps, why don't we just roast coffee faster? Like, save yourself some time. Get one of these tangential machines, and all that coffee you roast in a week, you could do it in a day. We look at those shopkeepers back in the 19th century who were turning the handle on Tina's great-granddad's roaster. It took like 30 minutes for just 3 kilos of coffee. And we think, wow, that is so inefficient. But maybe in 150 years' time, people are going to be looking back at us today and saying, look at them. What fools standing around roasting coffee for 12 minutes. So inefficient. So why don't we all just save ourselves a load of time and roast coffee in 2 minutes? Well, for starters, the coffee we saw roasted in just 2 minutes earlier, the beans afterwards look kind of weird. Whoa, look at those beans. They're
shiny.
But not only that, look how inconsistent they are in roast. Yeah. Some are super dark, some are quite light, like peanut light. And it's like someone sprayed oil on them. Mm-hmm. So ordinarily, specialty coffee beans should all be the same shade of brown, a little bit crinkly, and not oily. But these medium roasted beans cooked in just 2 minutes. The first problem is they were all really inconsistent in color, like a bowl of Skittles. The second problem was...
smoother. Smoother.
They were super smooth, as if they'd been ironed, like a shirt. And Ilvana explained why.
The water vapor, which is forming inside the cell structure, is building up a pressure.
Basically, those beans, right, they went into the roaster with 11% moisture, and then in just 2 minutes, that moisture dropped in half, as in half the water in the bean evaporated. But that evaporated water doesn't have anywhere to go. And as the pressure builds up, it puffs out the bean to the smoothness of a Skittle.
Yeah, it blows up the cells.
And the third weird thing about them was that they were really oily. Beans normally get oily when they're roasted very dark, but this is a medium roast. They shouldn't be this oily. It's like someone sprayed cooking oil all over them. Oh, why is that?
Yeah, because the pressure inside the beans is very high, so it presses out the oils to the outside.
So these 2-minute roasted beans, they look weird. But who cares? What matters is how they taste, right? And that's what we do next. Ilvana prepares a coffee tasting.
Yeah, it is the same roast degree, it's the same color, just difference in the roasting time.
They are all roasted to a very, very similar color, shade of brown. But the key difference is that they've been roasted fast and slow, using either a drum or a tangential roaster, all following a broadly similar roast curve.
The 11 minutes 30.
The first coffee we taste is a very standard 11-minute 30 roast on a drum roaster. This is the sort of coffee you'd expect to find in a specialty coffee cafe.
Has some fruitiness, some sweetness. Again, complexity is much wider. It's smooth.
And other members of the ProBat team, Dimar and Sandra, also join me for the tasting.
The complex and rounded.
I think more balanced.
So 11-minute 30 coffee. Fruity, balanced, complex. We then taste the exact same green beans, roasted to a very, very similar roast color. But instead of 11.5 minutes, it's roasted in just 2 minutes, using a tangential roaster, because a drum roaster can't even roast this fast.
It's a really slap in the face.
No, the acidity is overwhelming.
Wow, this was an unbalanced coffee. Not a bad coffee, but nearly as stewed.
Complex, not so bad.
The flavors weren't nearly as stewed. Complex. But the really big problem was the acidity. Really punchy.
Acidity and it's too much.
Now guys, there is a science for why this coffee roasted so fast produces this very unbalanced, very acidic flavors. And I'm going to create an infographic that explains it all very nicely. So if you want to see it, come to my Instagram, @FilterStoriesPodcast. Link in the show notes. Okay, so this 2-minute coffee, it tastes unbalanced, way too much acidity, nowhere near as complex, developed as that coffee that had been roasted for longer. So yeah, why would anyone roast this fast if the flavors aren't as good as longer roast times? Well, turns out there are many reasons why. Commercial instant coffee. Like, why bother roasting for longer to get nicer flavors if you're trying to make cheap instant coffee? Roast it as fast as you can, save time, save money. And also,
in the end, it's increasing the extraction out of the coffees.
Because the beans are so puffed up when you roast fast, you can actually extract more from the coffee into the water.
The shorter the roasting time, the higher the roasted coffee volume of the bean. So it's more open, and then you can extract more.
So if you're trying to make cheap instant coffee, those fast roasted puffed up beans give you even more bang for your buck. And there are other reasons too why you might want to roast this fast. For example, that 2-minute roast has a really high acidity, which could work very nicely in a commercial coffee blend.
Could be that you have a certain blend and you want to have slightly more acidity, and then you can blend in some short roasted coffees to get this acidity, and then you can use it.
So there it is. Now let's wrap up this section with a bit of cocktail lounge piano I've been learning recently. So, over the years, we specialty coffee professionals discovered that roasting between 10 to 20 minutes gives us very balanced, more developed flavor profiles, rounder, more complex cups. Coffees, by the way, which are also the ProBet team's personal favorites.
The complex and rounded personally preference.
But the reason we see fast roasting is because it goes into lower cost supermarket blends. It's for instant coffee, just for people who can't or don't want to pay for specialty coffee. Okay, but what about this? How do you roast specialty at scale? How do you scale up specialty coffee roasting? Well, coming up next, the whale.
Now we entering here on the new side.
Thomas, ProBet's head of R&D, leads me on a tour of their enormous factory.
My God.
A place where they turn literal sheets of raw metal into roasters. And early on in the tour, I see a lot of small drum roasters.
So that's manufacturing of the specialty roasters.
And all these drum roasters are at different stages of completion, all destined for specialty coffee roasters and cafes.
And so the specialty roasters we always build in small series.
And these are small roasters. I mean, at any one time, you can roast maybe 3 kilos, 5, 10, 25 kilos, small batches. But how do you scale this up? Because one thing you can't do is roast faster, because otherwise you get those really unbalanced, punchy, acidic flavors that we tasted earlier. And of course, the obvious answer is you scale it up by getting bigger roasters.
Then we're talking about really €1 million, something like that.
€1 million roaster. Wow, okay. Yeah.
Including all this environmental system.
And the bigger roaster could either be a drum roaster or also a tangential roaster. You can do a slower roast on the tangential. That tastes good. In fact, Thomas tells me that with a tangential, you have the benefits of both worlds. You can do super fast roasts if you want to, and also slower roasts.
Today, a lot of people thinking good roasting could be only done on a drum. But there are also other systems available which are more efficient in heat transfer, giving more flexibility in the whole range what you would like to do.
But I've never seen a specialty roaster use a tangential roaster, partly because it's actually more expensive.
But the investment cost is higher.
Oh, they're more pricey?
Yeah.
And also because I think we just have this emotional connection to the look, the feel of a beautiful drum roaster. And so the question really is then, how big can you make a drum roaster? Well, as Thomas continued the tour of the factory, along with Edith from ProBet's marketing team, the components just seem to be getting bigger and bigger.
The hell is this? What the hell is this? Does this belong to a submarine? This is huge.
That is front part of a drum door of a drum roaster.
But how big is the drum roaster?
You will see later on, yes.
And the more we walk, the bigger the components get.
This is as big as a car. It's as big as a car, this drum. It's like a mini.
And they get even bigger.
Manufacturing of swim baths.
Seriously, what is this? This is as big as a swimming pool.
Yeah, and that's a cooler. Huh?
What?
Until, finally,
Turn the corner.
around the corner, I was about to see a whale of a coffee roaster.
I can't imagine anything larger than this.
You cannot imagine the size of that roaster. Really. I've never seen a roaster of that size before.
Okay.
And I've been working here for 11 years.
Oh, really?
And not just Guinness World Record. This drum roaster deserves to be in the Guinness Book of World Records.
So, and that's the biggest drum roaster of the world.
This is the biggest drum roaster in the world?
Yeah.
This thing was the size of a tugboat.
Look at this thing. Look at this thing.
4 ton per hour capacity.
Wow, can I go up?
Yeah.
4 tons an hour.
Need a stairwell just to get to the door of this thing.
Stand on the cooler.
Feels like I'm standing on the deck of a ship.
Yeah.
Thomas tells me this beast of a roaster is going to be packed away into 16 containers and shipped to China.
Wow, what part of China?
I could not say.
For confidentiality reasons, Thomas wouldn't tell me who the customer is. But he hinted it's going to be roasting coffee for a lot of cafes.
We're talking not about 10 coffee shops. We're talking about 10,000 and 100,000 of coffee shops.
Oh, I think I know who this is.
I wonder if you too are thinking what I'm thinking. So peeps, this is how you scale up drum roasting. All right, so let's just zoom out and reflect on this whole story. About 150 years ago, Tina's great-granddad, Theodore, he helped engineer this little fire hydrant bowl roaster, which is now painted pink, where you have to spin a handle for 30 minutes to get just 3 kilos of coffee. And Probat got a piece of customer feedback.
The market asked for more. They wanted to roast more at a time.
And so they made a bigger roaster, a faster roaster, a drum roaster. But they still got the same piece of feedback.
The market demanded for more.
And then at some point, roasting manufacturers realized that air is the way, the key of getting as much energy as possible into beans fast. But then we discovered that we really shouldn't be roasting too fast because people may not like the flavors of the coffee anymore.
Look at the dryer. That dryer is as big as my face. It's enormous.
And I kind of wonder, staring up at this ginormous whale of a roaster, the largest drum roaster in the world, 4 tons an hour. What if Probat gets the same feedback again?
The market asked for more.
How do you scale this up further? A roaster. And maybe the answer is not necessarily building a bigger roaster. Like in the same way that the roasting industry discovered that air is the thing that can dramatically speed up the roasting process, what if we could find another breakthrough like that? Maybe there's a way the green bean is structured we could take advantage of to get heat into beans even more efficiently and for it to taste great. And when I was speaking with Sebastian and looking at his team's super complicated model,
Taste is out of our reach for now.
he was very clear, there is still so much we have yet to model. Like, for example, how heat moves through a coffee bean and then all the chemical flavor reactions.
So we would need to know which chemical reactions happen at which onset energy, and that's just way too complex.
No, come on. I saw 25 models there. Just add a few more models, and you're basically there.
So maybe in another 20 years. So this took 8, another 20 were there.
20 years. I'll be back in 20 years, guys. You'll be gray-haired.
I'll be no-haired.
No-haired.
But I think this is very good news for Sebastian. Because when I come back to Probat in 20 years' time and meet a fully bold Sebastian, not only will his name be engraved on those wooden boards, but he'll only have a couple more years left before they turn gold. In the next episode, we go to the country which grows the most coffee in the world. We are going to Brazil to explore how coffee farmers figure out who to sell their coffee to. Coffee that might eventually end up in one of those small drum roasters we saw in a factory, or in the biggest drum roaster in the world, or maybe the nuclear roaster that Sebastian comes up with in 20 years' time.
Okay, that's it. You were warned multiple times. This podcast is now officially terminated under Statute 57B of the Beverage Safety Act. Please remain calm as we initiate the shutdown sequence.
Screw you, Greg. So thank you very much for listening. And as you can probably tell, I had a lot of fun making this one, especially playing those more bluesy piano numbers. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I've been learning improv theater as an actor, and then also sometimes improvising piano for improv theater shows. And I think it's all feeding through into making Filter Stories much more creative. And I'm planning to write a newsletter on my Substack soon about this sort of creative process behind the scenes. So if you're interested, subscribe to my Substack newsletter with a link in the show notes. Now guys, Filter Stories, it's a one-man band. I write and play all the piano music. I craft all these stories. It's a stupid amount of work, but I do it because I love creating these stories that educate and entertain. And if you found this episode valuable, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with others. I struggle to find time to do the marketing for this show, and I'm just really reliant on peeps like you loving what you heard and sharing it. One thing that makes me so happy every time I see it is when you take a screen grab of you listening to this podcast on your podcast player, post it as a story, tag me at Filter Stories Podcast on Instagram, and that way I'm also able to say thank you. Okay, now what is left in the series? Coffee farmers. So next we go to Brazil to look at how coffee farmers decide who to sell their coffee to, how they find their buyers, including sometimes on the green coffee trading platform Algrano. Then we are in the mountains of Colombia, where I trace what a commodity coffee supply chain looks like, and then contrast it with the specialty coffee supply chain with my partner, the exporter-importer, the Coffee Quest. And then we are getting a little bit philosophical, and I answer maybe the hardest question of all. What is specialty coffee? Where do we draw the line? And that story is supported by the water filtration supplier, BWT. And the first episodes are an exploration of cold brew extraction science. And I have a lot of fun learning how hot and cold brews taste different using the Toddy Cold Brew Kit. Thanks again for listening, and I can't wait to speak to you in the next episode.